last time I checked my reflection in the polished steel of the walk-in cooler door, mascara smudged beneath my eyes and my ponytail askew, I looked exactly like someone who'd been on her feet for 10 straight hours. It was 11:45 on a Friday night, and Marino's was finally beginning to empty. The clatter of dishes being scraped and stacked in the kitchen provided a familiar rhythm, one I'd grown used to over the past 18 months working here. I was 25 years old and exhausted in a way that went deeper than sore muscles or tired eyes. Working as a waitress in Boston's North End wasn't what I'd imagined my life would look like when I'd started studying Italian and linguistics at Northeastern University. But tuition had become impossible after my mother died 3 years ago, leaving me with student loans and a grief so heavy I could barely function, let alone finish my degree. Now I lived in a cramped studio in Allston, rode the T to work, and counted my tips at the end of each shift with the kind of focus most people reserved for lottery tickets. $15 here, $20 there. Never quite sufficient. Always just shy of comfortable. Hannah, you're still on the floor? Marco, the floor manager, emerged from the kitchen with his usual harried expression. He was in his early 40s, balding, with the perpetual look of someone managing barely controlled chaos. Table 7 needs fresh linens before you go. I glanced at the clock mounted above the bar. We're closed, Marco. Can it wait until tomorrow? Just do it, please. There was an edge to his voice I didn't recognize, a nervousness that made me pause. I grabbed a stack of crisp white linens from the supply closet and headed toward table 7, which sat in our main dining room beneath a reproduction of a Venetian canal scene. The restaurant had been decorated to evoke old-world Italy, all exposed brick and warm lighting, the kind of place that charged $35 for pasta and got away with it because tourists expected authenticity in the North End. I'd just finished smoothing down the tablecloth when the front door opened. My first thought was to tell whoever it was that we were closed. The words were forming on my lips when Marco appeared beside me, moving faster than I'd ever seen him move, his hand gripping my elbow. "Mr. Caruso," Marco said, his voice climbing an octave. "We weren't expecting you tonight. But of course. Your usual table?" I turned to look at the men who'd entered. There were 5 of them, all dressed in dark suits that fit with the kind of precision that suggested tailoring, not department stores. But it was the man in the center who drew my attention like a magnet. He was tall, probably 6'1" or 6'2", with jet black hair styled away from his face. Even from across the room, I could see his eyes were dark, nearly black in the dim lighting, and his jawline looked sharp beneath carefully maintained stubble. He was maybe in his early 30s, and he carried himself with the kind of confidence that came from knowing every space he entered automatically belonged to him. Marco. His voice was low, measured, with the faintest trace of an accent I couldn't quite place. "The private room." Of course. Marco was practically vibrating with anxiety. He turned to me, fingers digging into my arm. "Hannah, you'll be serving them tonight." My stomach sank. "Marco, I've been here since 1 o'clock this afternoon. Can't Jessica?" Jessica called out sick. His eyes were pleading now, desperate. "Please, Hannah, these are very important guests. Very important." I looked back at the men, who were already moving toward the private dining room at the rear of the restaurant. The one Marco had called Mr. Caruso glanced back over his shoulder, and for just a moment, his eyes met mine. It felt like being assessed, catalogued, and dismissed all in the space of a heartbeat. "Fine," I muttered, grabbing my order pad from my apron pocket. "But I'm charging overtime." Marco was already pushing me toward the private room. "Whatever you want, just don't mess this up." The private dining room was smaller than the main space, with room for a single round table that could seat 8. Crystal glasses were already set out, and someone had dimmed the overhead lighting to create an atmosphere of intimacy and discretion. The 5 men were settling into their seats, removing suit jackets and draping them over chairbacks. I took a breath, smoothed down my black skirt, and pushed through the door. "Good evening, gentlemen." My voice came out steadier than I felt. "Can I start you with something to drink?" 4 of the men barely glanced at me. They were older, probably in their 40s or 50s, with faces that suggested they'd spent years perfecting the art of looking intimidating. But Mr. Caruso, seated at what I instinctively recognized as the head position despite the round table, leaned back in his chair, and studied me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. "Scotch," one of the older men said. "Neat. I'll have the same," another added. "Red wine," a third man said. "Whatever you'd recommend." I scribbled the orders, working my way around the table until I reached Mr. Caruso. He hadn't spoken yet, and I found myself oddly nervous to meet his gaze directly. "And for you, sir?" "Bourbon. Woodford Reserve, if you have it." He paused. "On the rocks." I nodded, writing it down, and turned to leave when his voice stopped me. "What's your name?" I glanced back, caught off guard by the directness of the question. "Hannah, sir." He nodded once, as if filing the information away for future reference. "Thank you, Hannah." The way he said my name made it sound like he was tasting it, trying it out. I pushed through the door quickly, needing distance from those dark eyes and the strange tension that had settled over my shoulders like a weight. In the bar area, I relayed the drink orders to Tony, our bartender, who raised an eyebrow. "Caruso's here? You know him?" Tony poured scotch into 2 glasses with practiced efficiency. "Everyone who works in the North End knows about the Carusos. Old family, very old money, and very connected, if you know what I mean." I didn't. Not really. But the way Tony said it suggested I shouldn't ask for clarification. I loaded the drinks onto a tray and carried them back to the private room, focusing on keeping my hands steady. The men had begun talking in low voices when I entered, but they fell silent as I approached. I distributed the drinks methodically, saving Mr. Caruso for last. When I set his bourbon in front of him, my sleeve caught on the edge of the glass, and it tilted dangerously. His hand shot out, faster than I would have thought possible, steadying both the glass and my wrist in one smooth motion. His fingers were warm against my skin, and I felt my breath catch. "Careful," he said softly. "That's a $60 pour." "I'm sorry," I stammered, pulling my hand back. "I'll be more careful." He released me, and I stepped back, hyper-aware of the way the other men were watching the interaction. One of them, a heavy-set man with silver in his hair, smirked. "Gabriel, I didn't know you'd gone soft. Time was, someone spilled your drink, they'd leave here missing fingers." Gabriel. So that was his first name. Gabriel Caruso. Gabriel's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered behind his eyes. "Times change, Vincent. We're civilized now." The way he said civilized made it sound like a joke, or possibly a threat. I couldn't tell which. "Are you ready to order, or would you like a few minutes with the menu?" I asked, desperate to fill the silence. "Give us 15 minutes, Gabriel said, his attention already shifting away from me, back to the men at the table. "And bring us the antipasto plate." I nodded and escaped gratefully, my heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with physical exertion. In the kitchen, I leaned against the cool steel of the prep counter and tried to steady myself. "You okay?" Sal, one of our line cooks, glanced over from where he was cleaning down his station. "You look pale." "I'm fine, just tired." I pushed off the counter and went to grab plates for the antipasto. Long day, but that wasn't entirely true. I wasn't just tired. There was something about Gabriel Caruso that had unsettled me in a way I couldn't quite name. The way he'd looked at me, as if he could see straight through the professional mask I wore to the exhaustion and loneliness beneath. The casual way he'd mentioned missing fingers, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I delivered the antipasto plate 20 minutes later, took their dinner orders, and spent the next hour moving between the kitchen and the private dining room in a carefully controlled dance. The men ate slowly, lingering over their food and wine, their conversation dropping to whispers whenever I entered the room. By the time they finished dessert, it was nearly 1:30 in the morning. My lower back ached, and I could feel a headache building behind my eyes. I cleared the last of the plates and returned with the check in a leather folder, setting it beside Gabriel's elbow. "Thank you for dining with us this evening," I said, the words automatic after months of repetition. "I hope everything was to your satisfaction." Gabriel opened the folder, glanced at the total, and withdrew a black credit card without looking at the amount. He handed it to me, his fingers brushing mine in the exchange, and for the second time that night, I felt a jolt of something I couldn't identify. "Everything was excellent," he said, His dark eyes held mine for a long moment. You work hard. It wasn't a question, just an observation. I didn't know how to respond, so I simply took the card and retreated to run it through the system. When I returned with the receipt, Gabriel signed it with a flourish I couldn't read. Then he stood, and the other men followed suit, gathering their jackets. As they filed out of the private dining room, Gabriel paused in the doorway. I was collecting water glasses, and I nearly dropped one when I realized he was standing just inches away. Do you always work this late? He asked. Only on Fridays and Saturdays, I said, setting down the glasses carefully. We're usually busy. He nodded slowly, as if considering this information. Then, to my surprise, he reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a business card, setting it on the table beside me. If you ever need anything, he said quietly, call that number. I stared at the card. It was cream-colored, expensive-looking, with nothing on it but a phone number embossed in gold. I don't understand, I began. But when I looked up, he was already gone. I picked up the card, turning it over in my fingers. The back was blank. No name, no title, no indication of what kind of business this number might connect to. Just 10 digits, and a sense of something unspoken hanging in the air. Marco appeared in the doorway, looking relieved. They're gone. Yes. I tucked the card into my apron pocket, not sure why I didn't want Marco to see it. They just left. Thank God. He ran a hand over his face. You did well, Hannah. Really well. Marco, who are they? He shook his head. Nobody you need to worry about, just... If they come back, you serve them, understand? Always you. I wanted to press for more information, but the exhaustion was winning. I finished cleaning the private dining room, collected my tips from the check folder. Gabriel had left $200 on a $300 bill, and changed out of my work shoes in the break room. Outside, a light drizzle had started, typical for Boston in November. I pulled my thin jacket tighter and began the 15-minute walk to the T-station, my thoughts circling back to Gabriel Caruso and his unsettling presence. I'd almost reached the corner when I realized I was being followed. It wasn't anything obvious, just the sense of footsteps matching my pace half a block behind. I quickened my step, and so did whoever was behind me. My heart rate spiked, and I clutched my purse tighter, wishing I'd taken an Uber despite the expense. A hand caught my elbow, and I spun around, ready to scream. It was one of the men from the restaurant, the heavy-set one Gabriel had called Vincent. Up close, he looked less intimidating and more tired, with deep lines around his eyes. Miss Hannah, he said, releasing my arm immediately when he saw my alarm. I'm sorry to startle you. Mr. Caruso sent me to make sure you got home safely. I stepped back, putting distance between us. That's not necessary. Perhaps not. He gestured to a black SUV idling at the curb. But he insisted. Please, I'll drive you wherever you need to go. Every instinct I had screamed that getting into a car with a stranger was a terrible idea. I pulled out my phone on instinct, thumb hovering over Marco's name as I typed out a quick text with the cross streets and a vague description of the SUV. Some thin illusion of control, a breadcrumb trail in case this went bad. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make stepping toward the open door feel slightly less like volunteering for a cautionary tale. But the alternative was walking alone through Boston at nearly 2 a.m, and suddenly Gabriel Caruso's card felt heavy in my pocket, like a promise or possibly a warning. I made my decision, though I wasn't sure it was the right one. Fine, I said, moving toward the SUV. But just to the T-station. Vincent opened the back door for me. Of course. Wherever you'd like. I climbed in, and the door closed behind me with an expensive, solid sound. The interior smelled like leather and something else. Something masculine and faintly spiced. And there, in the corner of the back seat, partially hidden in shadow, sat Gabriel Caruso himself. I thought you might prefer a ride, he said calmly, as if it were perfectly normal to be waiting in a car outside a restaurant at 2 a.m. It's late, and Boston isn't always safe for a woman alone. My mouth went dry. You were waiting for me? I was ensuring you got home safely. He gestured to the empty space beside him. Where do you live, Hannah? I should have gotten out of the car. I should have told him I didn't need his protection or his interference, but I was tired and cold, and something about the way he looked at me made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in years. "Alston," I heard myself say. Near the Brighton border. Gabriel leaned forward and gave Vincent an address that was, impossibly, my exact address. I stared at him, alarm bells finally ringing loud and clear in my head. "How do you know where I live?" "Employee records," he said simply. "Marco was kind sufficient to share them. That's a violation of privacy." "Perhaps." He settled back in his seat as the SUV pulled away from the curb. "But you're safe now. That's what matters." I pressed myself against the opposite side of the car, trying to maintain as much distance as possible in the confined space. "I don't know what you think this is, but I'm not interested in whatever you're offering." Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. "I'm not offering anything, Hannah. Just a ride home on a rainy night." We rode in silence through the empty streets, past closed storefronts and the occasional pedestrian hurrying home. I kept my hand on the door handle, ready to bolt if necessary. But Gabriel made no move toward me. He simply sat, watching the city pass by the tinted windows, his expression unreadable. When we reached my building, a run-down brownstone that had been converted into apartments sometime in the 70s, Vincent opened my door. I climbed out quickly, relief flooding through me at being back on familiar ground. "Thank you for the ride," I said stiffly, "but please don't do this again." Gabriel had lowered his window. "Lock your door tonight, Hannah, and don't walk home alone anymore." It sounded like advice, but it felt like something else. A command, maybe, or a promise. I backed away from the SUV, and it pulled away from the curb smoothly, disappearing into the night. In my apartment, I triple-checked the locks and sat on my second-hand couch, my hands trembling slightly as I pulled out Gabriel Caruso's business card. I should have thrown it away. Instead, I placed it on my coffee table and stared at it, wondering what I'd just gotten myself into, and whether I'd made a terrible mistake in accepting his ride. Sleep came eventually, but it was restless, filled with dark eyes and the sensation of fingers warm against my wrist, steadying me before I fell. I woke Saturday morning to 17 text messages from Marco asking if I was okay and reminding me that I had a shift starting at noon. My alarm hadn't gone off, or more likely, I'd slept through it after finally falling into an uneasy sleep, sometime around 4 a.m. Every time I'd closed my eyes, I'd seen Gabriel Caruso's face. Those dark eyes watching me with an intensity that felt like being catalogued. The business card was still sitting on my coffee table where I'd left it, cream-colored and expensive-looking against the water-stained wood. I picked it up, running my thumb over the embossed numbers, then tucked it into my wallet. I told myself I was keeping it for practical reasons, not because some part of me wanted to remember the way his fingers had felt against my wrist when he'd steadied my hand. Work passed in a blur of lunch orders and tourists asking for recommendations on cannoli. Marco kept shooting me worried glances, probably afraid I'd quit after being volunteered to serve Gabriel's table, but I needed this job too badly to walk away over one uncomfortable evening. By the time my shift ended at 5, I'd almost convinced myself that the whole thing had been nothing more than a strange encounter I could file away and forget. Then I saw the black SUV parked across the street from Marino's. It was the same vehicle from last night. I was certain of it. Tinted windows, gleaming even in the fading November light, idling at the curb like a patient predator. I stood in the restaurant's doorway, my jacket half on, debating whether I was being paranoid or reasonably cautious. The decision was made for me when the rear door opened and Gabriel Caruso stepped out. He was dressed more casually today, if you could call tailored black pants and a charcoal sweater casual. The sweater fit him perfectly, emphasizing broad shoulders and a lean frame that suggested regular physical activity. He walked toward me with that same unhurried confidence, and I found myself frozen in place, watching him approach. "Hannah." He said my name like a greeting and a question simultaneously. "Do you have plans this evening?" My brain struggled to catch up with the situation. "I'm going home, like a normal person does after work." "I'd like to talk to you," he said, stopping a few feet away, close sufficient to speak privately, but not so close that it felt threatening. "If you're willing." "About what?" "The necklace you're wearing." His eyes dropped to my collarbone, and I instinctively reached for the delicate silver chain that had slipped free from my shirt collar. "Where did you get it?" I'd bought the necklace 6 months ago from a thrift store in Jamaica Plain, drawn to the small silver lily pendant that hung from the chain. It had cost $15, a splurge I couldn't really afford, but something about it had felt right. I wore it every day, tucked beneath my uniform at work, a small piece of beauty in an otherwise utilitarian wardrobe. "I bought it," I said, defensive without quite knowing why. "From a second-hand store." "Why does it matter?" Something crossed his face then, an expression so raw and unguarded that it made my chest constrict. Pain, I realized. Deep, visceral pain that he couldn't quite hide. "That necklace belonged to my sister," he said quietly. "She died 4 years ago." The words hung in the air between us, heavy with grief and something else I couldn't identify. I touched the pendant again, feeling the cool metal against my fingers. "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. "I didn't know. I can give it back to you if you want." "Not here." He glanced around at the busy street, pedestrians hurrying past in the early evening darkness. "Please, come with me and we can discuss this properly." Every self-preservation instinct I had told me to refuse. I didn't know this man. Yes, he'd given me a ride home last night, but that didn't make him trustworthy. He could be anyone, could want anything from me. But the pain in his eyes was real, and the necklace suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds against my skin. "Where?" I asked. "My apartment. It's not far from here." I should have said no. Instead, I heard myself say, "Fine, but I'm taking my own car. I'll have Vincent drive you." He gestured to the SUV. "I don't feel comfortable with you driving alone right now." "Why not?" He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Because you're wearing something that connects you to me, and that makes you vulnerable. Please, Hannah, trust me on this." I didn't trust him, not really. But I got into the SUV anyway, and Gabriel slid in beside me. Vincent, who I now recognized as the heavy-set man from last night, pulled away from the curb without a word. We drove through the city in silence, past the familiar streets of the North End and into the Seaport District, where old warehouses had been converted into luxury condominiums with harbor views. The SUV pulled up in front of a modern glass and steel building that probably had its own concierge service. "This way," Gabriel said, leading me through a lobby with minimalist furniture and contemporary art on the walls. A security guard nodded at Gabriel with the kind of deferential respect that suggested he was well known here. The elevator rose smoothly to the 22nd floor, and Gabriel's apartment took up the entire level. I stepped inside and tried not to gape at the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of Boston Harbor, lights beginning to twinkle across the water as darkness fell. The apartment itself was beautiful in an understated way. Dark hardwood floors, modern furniture in shades of gray and black, art that looked expensive without being ostentatious. Everything was immaculately clean and perfectly arranged, the home of someone who valued control and order. "Would you like something to drink?" Gabriel asked, moving to a bar area tucked into one corner. "Water, wine, coffee?" "Water is fine." I stayed near the windows, maintaining distance, still not entirely sure why I'd agreed to come here. He returned with 2 glasses of water, handing one to me before gesturing to a leather sofa that faced the windows. "Please sit." I perched on the edge of the sofa, hyper-aware of the space between us when he sat at the opposite end. He took a long drink of water, then set the glass down on a side table with deliberate care. "The necklace," he said finally. "Tell me exactly where you bought it." "St. Catherine's thrift shop in Jamaica Plain, 6 months ago." I touched the pendant again, a nervous habit. There was a box of jewelry, mostly costume stuff. This was mixed in with everything else. He pulled out his phone and made a call, speaking in rapid Italian that I couldn't follow. My Italian was decent, good better for reading than conversation, but he spoke too quickly for me to catch more than a few words. When he ended the call, he looked at me. "I'm having someone verify that," he said. "The shop, the timeline, all of it. You don't believe me? I need to be certain." He leaned forward slightly, his expression intense. "That necklace disappeared when my sister died. I spent months looking for it, hired investigators, questioned everyone who'd been near her in the days before her death. And now you're wearing it, 6 months after buying it from a thrift store. I'm not lying to you. I know. His phone buzzed, and he glanced at the screen, reading whatever message had come through. My associate just confirmed it. St. Catherine's received a large anonymous donation approximately 7 months ago. Boxes of clothing, jewelry, household items. All high quality, some of it expensive. I frowned. So someone donated your sister's necklace? So it would appear. He stood abruptly, walking to the windows and staring out at the harbor. Which means someone who had access to Arya's belongings gave them away to charity. Maybe she gave them away herself, I suggested. Before she died, he turned back to me, and the pain in his eyes was sharper now, closer to the surface. Arya died in a car accident. Single vehicle collision on a rainy night. She was alone, and by the time anyone found her, she was already gone. I'm so sorry. The words felt inadequate, but I didn't know what else to say. She was 24 years old. His voice had gone quiet, almost distant. Bright, creative, talented. She wanted to be an artist. Did you know that? I shook my head. He moved to a bookshelf and withdrew a small leather-bound journal, handling it with a reverence that spoke of how precious it was. I found this in her apartment after she died. Her diary. It's written in Italian, an old dialect that my grandmother used to speak. I could never read it properly. I studied Italian in college, I offered. I'm not fluent, but I can read it fairly well. He looked at me then. Really looked at me, as if seeing me for the first time. Would you? Would you be willing to translate it for me? The request caught me off guard. I don't understand. Why would you trust me with something so personal? Because you didn't have to tell me about the necklace, he said simply. You could have hidden it, pretended you'd never seen it before. But you were honest with me. That matters. I thought about the student loans sitting in my bank account, the overdue rent notice I'd received last week, the constant calculation of whether I could afford groceries this week or next. And here was Gabriel Caruso, offering me access to his sister's most private thoughts. I'd need to be paid, I said, hating the mercenary sound of it but unable to pretend otherwise. I have bills. $3,000, he said immediately. For a week of work. You'll come here each day, translate what you can, and help me understand what Arya was thinking in the months before she died. $3,000 was more than I made in a month at Marino's. It was the difference between drowning and treading water, between falling behind on rent and maybe, just maybe, getting ahead for once. Yes, I said before I could overthink it. I'll do it. He extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation I shook it. His grip was firm, warm, and when he released my hand, I could still feel the imprint of his fingers against my palm. You can start tomorrow, he said. Come at 10 in the morning. I'll have coffee and breakfast ready. I work at Marino's tomorrow. I'll speak to Marco. He'll give you the time off. There was no question in his voice, no suggestion that Marco might refuse. Just certainty that what Gabriel Caruso wanted, Gabriel Caruso would get. I should have been bothered by that kind of arrogance. Instead, I found myself thinking about $3,000 and the way grief had carved lines around his eyes when he'd talked about his sister. Fine, I said, standing. 10 o'clock. But I'm not coming here every day, that's too much. We can work at a coffee shop or somewhere public. This is safer. Safer from what? He didn't answer immediately, and when he did, his voice had taken on a harder edge. From people who might be interested in why someone like you is spending time with someone like me. Before I could ask what that meant, he was already heading for the door. Vincent will drive you home. Lock your doors tonight, Hannah. And tomorrow bring questions. I want to know everything you learn from Arya's journal. The ride back to Alston was quiet. Vincent didn't try to make conversation, and I was grateful for the silence. My head was spinning with the strangeness of the evening. The casual way Gabriel had offered me more money than I'd seen in months. The vulnerability in his eyes when he'd talked about his sister. In my apartment, I made instant ramen and sat on my couch, the necklace heavy against my collarbone. I took it off carefully, holding the lily pendant up to the light. It was beautiful work, delicate and precisely crafted. The kind of thing someone would have made specifically for a particular person. I thought about Arya Caruso, dead at 24, her possessions scattered to charity shops across the city. I thought about Gabriel, grief-stricken and desperate for answers 4 years after losing her, and I thought about myself, agreeing to insert myself into a situation I didn't fully understand, because I needed money badly sufficient to overlook every warning sign. When I finally went to bed, I placed the necklace on my nightstand and stared at it until sleep claimed me. Tomorrow, I would begin reading a dead woman's diary and trying to understand what had driven her to give away something so beautiful, so personal. In the days or weeks before her death, tomorrow, I would step further into Gabriel Caruso's world. And I had a feeling that once I crossed that threshold, there would be no easy way back. 3 days passed before I fully grasped what agreeing to translate Aria's diary would mean. Marco had been surprisingly accommodating when Gabriel called, granting me an entire week off without hesitation or questions. That alone should have told me something about Gabriel's reach in the North End, about how much influence he wielded with a single phone call. On Sunday morning, I arrived at Gabriel's apartment building at exactly 10 o'clock, clutching my bag and feeling absurdly nervous. The security guard recognized me from my previous visit and waved me through without checking identification, which was both convenient and unsettling. Gabriel opened his apartment door, wearing dark jeans and a navy Henley that made him look more approachable than the suited figure I'd served at Marino's. His hair was slightly damp, as if he'd recently showered, and the scent of coffee drifted from somewhere deeper in the apartment. "Hannah." He stepped aside to let me in. "Thank you for coming." The apartment looked different in daylight, sunlight streaming through those massive windows and turning the harbor waters beyond into a sheet of sparkling glass. He'd set up a workspace on the dining table, which I hadn't noticed during my previous visit. Aria's diary sat in the center, alongside a laptop, several notebooks, and 2 steaming mugs of coffee. "I wasn't sure how you took your coffee," he said, gesturing to a small station on the counter where cream and sugar waited. "Help yourself." I fixed my coffee while he settled into a chair at the table, his movements controlled and deliberate. Everything about Gabriel suggested careful restraint, as if he was constantly monitoring himself, maintaining rigid control over his emotions and actions. "Before we start," he said as I sat across from him, "I need you to understand something. What you read in that diary stays between us. No exceptions." "I already agreed to translate it," I reminded him. "I'm not going to gossip about your sister's private thoughts." "I appreciate that." He pushed the diary toward me. "But I mean it, Hannah. Some of what's written here may be difficult, painful, things she never told anyone while she was alive." I opened the diary carefully, noting the worn leather cover and yellowed pages. The handwriting inside was elegant, but hurried in places, as if thoughts had tumbled out faster than the pen could capture them. The date on the first entry was from about 8 months before Aria's death. "The dialect," I said, scanning the first few lines. "It's definitely Abruzzese. My Italian professor in college was from that region. I should be able to work through it. But some phrases might take time. Take all the time you need." I spent the first hour working through the initial entries, which were mostly mundane observations about Aria's daily life. She'd been taking art classes at the Museum of Fine Arts, working part-time at a gallery in the South End, trying to build a portfolio. Her writing revealed someone thoughtful and sensitive, aware of beauty and small details most people overlooked. Gabriel worked on his laptop while I translated, occasionally taking phone calls in Italian and stepping onto the balcony for privacy. I tried not to listen, but his voice carried through the glass, low and authoritative as he discussed what sounded like business matters. "This entry," I said, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between us. "From 6 months before she died. She writes about feeling trapped." Gabriel's attention snapped to me immediately. "Trapped how?" I read aloud, translating as I went. "I love my family, but sometimes I feel like I'm suffocating in their expectations. Papa wants me to marry someone from the right family, to produce grandchildren who will carry on the Caruso name. Gabriel tries to protect me, but he doesn't understand that his protection feels like a different kind of cage. I want to paint. I want to create. I want to be more than just someone's daughter or sister." Gabriel's jaw tightened, and he looked away toward the windows. "Keep reading." The next several hours passed in cycles of translation and silence. I would read passages aloud, and Gabriel would absorb them with an expression that grew increasingly pained. Arya had been struggling, that much was clear. She'd felt stifled by family obligations, frustrated by her father's controlling nature, desperate for independence that seemed always just out of reach. She mentioned someone, I said around 2 p.m, when Gabriel had insisted we break for lunch. He'd ordered food from somewhere, containers of pasta and salad spread across the table. She refers to him only as L. Do you know who that might be? Gabriel's fork paused halfway to his mouth. No. Arya never mentioned anyone to me. Not romantically. It's subtle at first. Little references to someone who makes her feel understood, who sees her as an artist rather than a Caruso. I flipped through several pages. But here, about 4 months before her death, she writes more directly. Elle told me today that I have real talent, that my work deserves to be seen. When I'm with him, I forget about Papa's disapproval and Gabriel's worried glances. I forget about the weight of our last name. He makes me feel free. Free. Gabriel repeated, the word heavy with irony. She wanted freedom, and I never gave it to her. You were protecting her, I said, though I wasn't sure why I felt compelled to defend him. That's what older siblings do. Is it protection if it makes the person you love feel like a prisoner? He set down his fork. Keep going. I need to know who this Elle was. The afternoon revealed more pieces of the puzzle. Arya had been meeting Elle secretly, stealing away from family obligations to spend time with someone who clearly meant a great deal to her. Her writing grew lighter when she mentioned him, more hopeful. She'd been planning something. That much became clear, though the exact details remained vague. This entry is from 3 weeks before her death, I said, as the sun began to set outside the windows. She writes, I told Elle about my plan today. He was scared, said it was too dangerous, that Papa would never forgive me. But I can't keep living this half-life, pretending to be satisfied with charitable work and gallery openings when what I really want is to paint, to travel, to exist as myself, rather than as a Caruso. Elle said he would support whatever decision I made, even if it meant losing me. That's how I know he really loves me. What plan? Gabriel leaned forward. What was she going to do? She doesn't specify. Not in this entry. I turned the page carefully, but she mentions donations. Getting rid of things she won't need anymore. Understanding dawned on Gabriel's face. The jewelry, the clothes. She was preparing to leave. It looks that way. He stood abruptly, walking to the windows and bracing his hands against the glass. She was going to disappear. Start over somewhere new, away from the family, away from everything we represented. Gabriel, and I never saw it. His voice was tight with controlled emotion. I thought I knew her. I thought we were close. But she was planning to abandon everything, and I was completely blind to it. I closed the diary carefully, giving him space to process. The silence stretched between us, broken only by the distant sound of boats in the harbor below. When he finally turned back to me, his eyes were red-rimmed but dry. I need to know who Elle was, he said. If Arya trusted him with her plan, he might know what happened that night. Why she was driving alone on a rainy road when she should have been at a family dinner. I can keep translating, I offered. There are still several entries left. Tomorrow. He ran a hand through his hair, disheveling the careful styling. I think we both need a break. He was right. My eyes ached from hours of deciphering the old dialect, and emotional exhaustion had settled over me like a weight. Reading Arya's words, feeling her desperation for freedom and her hope for a different life, had been more draining than I'd expected. Vincent will drive you home, Gabriel said, already pulling out his phone. Same time tomorrow? I'll be here. He walked me to the door, and for a moment, we stood close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from him. Thank you, Hannah, for doing this, for helping me understand her. You loved her very much, I said softly. That comes through in how much this matters to you. I loved her, he agreed, but I didn't set her free. And now I'll never get the chance to make that right. The ride back to Alston was quiet, giving me time to think about everything I'd translated. Arya Caruso had been 24 years old, talented and desperate, planning to escape a life that felt like a cage. And then she died, alone on a rainy road, 3 weeks after writing about her plans for freedom. The timing felt wrong, too coincidental. But I kept that thought to myself, tucked away alongside the growing unease I felt about Gabriel's world and my place in it. In my apartment, I made tea and thought about my own mother, who'd died 3 years ago and left me adrift in a city that suddenly felt too big and too lonely. I thought about the choices we make when we feel trapped, about the risks we take for the chance at something better. And I thought about Gabriel Caruso, standing at those massive windows, with his shoulders rigid and his heart breaking over a sister he'd lost, and apparently never truly understood. Tomorrow, I would return to his apartment and continue translating Aria's final thoughts, and help him piece together the mystery of why she'd donated away her possessions and what had driven her onto that fatal road. By Friday, we'd fallen into a rhythm. I would arrive at 10, Gabriel would have coffee waiting, and we'd spend hours working through Aria's diary together. The translations were getting easier as I became more familiar with her handwriting and the particular quirks of the Abruzzese dialect she'd used. On Saturday morning, Gabriel met me at the door with an unusual request. "I'd like to take you somewhere today," he said. "If you're willing." I set down my bag, wary. "Where?" "Mount Auburn Cemetery, in Cambridge." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Aria is buried there. I haven't visited since the funeral. I thought it might help to see her grave while working through her diary." The vulnerability in his voice made refusal impossible. "Okay. Let me just get my jacket." The drive to Cambridge took nearly 40 minutes in Saturday traffic. Gabriel sat beside me in the back of the SUV, quieter than usual, his jaw tight with tension. Vincent drove with his usual silent efficiency, navigating through streets lined with autumn foliage turning gold and crimson. Mount Auburn Cemetery was beautiful in a melancholy way, rolling hills covered with monuments and old trees. Gabriel led me along winding paths until we reached a simple granite headstone that read, "Aria Maria Caruso, 1997-2021, beloved daughter and sister." He stood before the grave for a long moment, hands in his pockets, shoulders rigid. I stayed back, giving him privacy, watching leaves drift down from nearby maples. "I'm sorry, Ari," he said finally, his voice low. "I should have seen what you needed. Should have given you space to breathe instead of trying to keep you safe in a cage." The rawness of his grief hit me like a physical force. I found myself moving closer, not touching him, but close sufficient that he'd know he wasn't alone. "She knew you loved her," I said quietly. "That comes through in everything she wrote." "Does it?" He looked at me, and his eyes were red-rimmed. Or did she just feel trapped by that love? Both can be true. I thought about my own mother, about the complicated mix of love and frustration that had defined our relationship in her final years. Love isn't simple. It doesn't erase the ways we hurt each other, even when we mean well. Gabriel nodded slowly, returning his attention to the headstone. "I found out who L is. Lorenzo Bianchi. He teaches art at the Museum of Fine Arts. I had someone look into him." "What are you going to do?" "Talk to him. Find out what Aria was planning, why she felt she couldn't tell me." He glanced at me. "Will you come with me? To meet him?" The request surprised me. "Why would you want me there?" "Because you understand her in a way I couldn't. You've read her words, felt what she was feeling. And because," he hesitated, "because you're helping me see things differently, more clearly." Against my better judgment, I agreed. We left the cemetery as early afternoon sun filtered through bare branches. Gabriel was quieter on the drive back, processing whatever emotions visiting his sister's grave had stirred up. I watched the city pass by the window and wondered what kind of man Lorenzo Bianchi was, what he'd meant to Aria during those final months. Back at the apartment, Gabriel made phone calls while I returned to translating. The later entries in Aria's diary were more fragmented, written in bursts of emotion rather than careful reflection. "This one," I said when Gabriel finished his calls, "from 2 weeks before she died. She's scared. Read it." I translated carefully, trying to capture the urgency in her writing. "L wants me to be careful. Says the family is watching me more closely. Papa asks questions about where I've been spending my time. Gabriel has been different lately, more protective, more worried. I think they suspect something, but I can't turn back now. I've made arrangements. The donations are complete. 2 more weeks and I'll be free. 2 more weeks and I can start being who I really am. Gabriel's expression had gone cold, dangerous. She was planning to disappear. In 2 weeks. Instead, she died. I closed the diary. Gabriel, what if it wasn't an accident? He was silent for a long moment. I've wondered that for 4 years. The police said there was no evidence of foul play. Single vehicle collision, rainy road, she lost control. But Aria was a careful driver. She wouldn't have been speeding on a night like that, unless she was running from something. Or someone. He stood, pacing to the windows. I need to know what happened that night. I need to understand why she was alone when she should have been at dinner with the family. I wanted to ask more, to push for details about what kind of family business would make a young woman desperate for freedom. But the set of Gabriel's shoulders warned me against it. Tomorrow, he said, turning back to me. I'll arrange a meeting with Lorenzo. I want answers, and he's the only one left who might have them. The sun was setting, painting the harbor in shades of orange and gold. Gabriel moved to the bar and poured 2 glasses of wine without asking if I wanted one. He handed me a glass and gestured toward the balcony. Join me. Outside, the November air was crisp, carrying the salt scent of the harbor. We stood at the railing, watching boats move across the water, neither of us speaking for several minutes. Thank you, Gabriel said finally, for coming to the cemetery, for doing all of this. You're paying me well. The words came out more defensive than I'd intended. It's more than that. He looked at me, and something in his gaze made my breath catch. You could have taken the money and done the minimum. But you're not. You're helping me understand her. Helping me see where I failed. You didn't fail her. I loved her wrong. He took a drink of wine. I protected her so hard that I suffocated her. I was so focused on keeping her safe from external threats that I became the threat she needed to escape from. I didn't know what to say to that, so I stayed quiet, letting him work through the realization. I won't make that mistake again, he said, more to himself than to me. We finished our wine as darkness fell completely, city lights beginning to sparkle below us. When Gabriel finally suggested Vincent drive me home, I felt oddly reluctant to leave. The apartment had started to feel familiar, safe in a way my own cramped studio never had. Tomorrow, Gabriel said as we rode the elevator down. 10 o'clock. We'll go see Lorenzo together. Okay. In the lobby, just before I headed to where Vincent waited with the SUV, Gabriel caught my wrist. His fingers were warm, his grip gentle but firm. Hannah, whatever you learn about my family through this process, whatever you figure out about who we are and what we do, I need you to know that Arya wanted out for good reasons. She saw things clearly. More clearly than I did. It was the closest he'd come to acknowledging what I'd already begun to suspect. What Marco's nervousness and the deference of restaurant staff had hinted at. The Caruso family wasn't just wealthy. They were something else. Something darker. I understand, I said, though I wasn't sure I did. He released my wrist, and I felt the ghost of his touch all the way home. In my apartment, I lay awake thinking about Arya and her desperate bid for freedom. About Gabriel, and the grief that drove him to interrogate every moment of his sister's final weeks. And I thought about myself, about how easily I'd been drawn into their story, how the promise of money had opened a door I might not be able to close. Tomorrow, we would meet Lorenzo Bianchi, and I would learn more about the woman whose necklace I'd bought for $15 in a thrift shop. The 3rd night after we visited Arya's grave, I worked a double shift at Marino's to make up for lost hours. My phone buzzed around 9 with a text from an unknown number. It took me a moment to realize it was Gabriel, though I'd never given him my cell. There's someone outside your building. Russian accent. Don't leave Marino's until I send Vincent. My hands went cold. I looked out the restaurant's front window at the darkened street, searching for any sign of the man Gabriel described. Nothing obvious caught my eye, but that didn't mean he wasn't there. 20 minutes later, Vincent appeared at Marino's entrance. Marco waved me off without question, which only reinforced my growing suspicion that Gabriel's influence ran deeper than I'd understood. The ride was tense. Vincent took a circuitous route through Boston, doubling back twice before we finally headed toward the seaport. Not my apartment in Alston. Gabriel was waiting when we arrived at his building, tension radiating from every line of his body. He ushered me inside without a word, and we rode the elevator in charged silence. Who was he? I asked once we were in his apartment. Volkov family. Russian operation that's been trying to expand into territory I control. Gabriel poured himself bourbon, then offered me one. I accepted. They've noticed you've been spending time here. That makes you a potential vulnerability. A vulnerability. The word tasted bitter. You mean a target? Yes. He didn't try to soften it. Hannah, I need you to stay here tonight. It's not safe for you to go home right now. You can't just decide that for me. I'm not deciding. I'm informing you of the reality. His voice was hard, leaving no room for argument. These men don't play by rules, you understand. They saw you leave my building multiple times this week. They know you're connected to me. That's all the justification they need. Fear crawled up my spine, but anger came with it. This is exactly what Arya was running from, isn't it? This life where people become chess pieces in someone else's game? Gabriel's jaw tightened. Yes, and she died trying to escape it. The implication hung heavy between us. I could run like Arya had tried to, or I could accept Gabriel's protection. Neither option felt like a real choice. Fine, I said finally. One night. But we're having a conversation about this in the morning. He showed me to a guest room I hadn't seen before, tastefully decorated in shades of cream and gray. Everything I might need had been laid out, from toiletries to a set of sleep clothes that looked suspiciously like they'd fit me. You planned this, I said, holding up the pajamas. I hoped I wouldn't need to. He paused in the doorway. Lock the door if it makes you feel safer. I'll be in my room at the end of the hall. I did lock the door, then sat on the edge of the bed, trying to process what had just happened. In the span of a week, I'd gone from serving Gabriel at a restaurant to translating his dead sister's diary to hiding in his apartment from Russian mobsters who apparently saw me as leverage. Sleep came in fits, interrupted by unfamiliar sounds and the persistent awareness that Gabriel was just down the hall. Morning found me in the kitchen, attempting to make coffee in his complicated espresso machine. Gabriel emerged wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt, hair disheveled from sleep. It was the most casual I'd ever seen him, and somehow that made him more intimidating rather than less. Let me, he said, gently moving me aside to work the machine. It takes practice. We sat at the dining table with our coffee, the same table where we'd spent hours working through Arya's diary. Now it felt different, weighted with everything unspoken between us. I made calls last night, Gabriel said. The Volkov situation is being handled through intermediaries. Neutral families are mediating. It should be resolved within a week. Should be. Will be. The certainty in his voice suggested he'd made concessions to ensure it. You'll be able to return to your normal life. Will I? I met his gaze directly. Gabriel, what exactly is your normal life? Because I'm starting to understand that restaurants and real estate aren't your primary business. He was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words with visible care. My family has been in Boston for 4 generations. We have interests in various enterprises, some more legitimate than others. I inherited control when my father stepped down 6 months ago. Stepped down or was removed? Does it matter? It does if I'm going to understand what Arya was running from. Gabriel stood, walking to the windows. Morning light painted the harbor in shades of gold. My father believed in old ways. Violence, intimidation, absolute control. Arya hated it. Hated what it made us, what it required of us. She wanted out, wanted to be just a normal woman who painted and lived quietly, but you wouldn't let her go. I thought I was protecting her. His reflection in the glass looked haunted. I thought keeping her close meant keeping her safe. Instead, it drove her to plan an escape so desperate she was willing to walk away from everything, including me. What happened the night she died? She was supposed to be at a family dinner. She called me an hour beforehand, said she was sick, staying home. I believed her. His hands flexed against the glass. The police found her car wrapped around a tree on a back road 2 hours outside the city. She'd been driving fast, they said. Too fast for the conditions, But you don't think it was an accident? I know it wasn't. He turned to face me. I've spent the last 6 months investigating. The brake lines on her car had been tampered with. Professionally. Someone knew she was running, and they made sure she wouldn't make it. My coffee had gone cold in my hands. Your father? I confronted him 3 months ago with the evidence. He didn't deny it. Gabriel's expression had gone flat, emotionless in a way that suggested volcanic rage beneath. He said Arya was planning to testify against family operations to the FBI, that she'd made a deal for witness protection in exchange for information that would have destroyed everything he'd built. He ordered her death to prevent that testimony. The casual brutality of it stole my breath. What did you do? I took control of the organization, exiled him to a property in Sicily. He's alive, but he'll never set foot in America again. Gabriel moved back to the table, sitting across from me, and I've been trying to dismantle the parts of the business Arya found most reprehensible. It's slow work. You can't just walk away from this life, Hannah, but you can try to change it from within. I thought about Arya's diary, her desperate plans for freedom, the donations she'd made in preparation for a new life she'd never live. She would have gotten out if your father hadn't stopped her. Yes, and I carry that knowledge every day. He reached across the table, his hand hovering near mine but not quite touching, which is why I won't make her mistake with you. What mistake? Letting protection become a cage. His dark eyes held mine. You can leave whenever you want, Hannah. Go back to your life. Forget about all of this. I'll make sure the Volkov family understands you're off limits, that you mean nothing to me. You'll be safe. The lie in that last statement sat heavy between us. I didn't mean nothing to him. I'd seen too much in the past week to believe that. The way he looked at me, the careful consideration he showed for my comfort, the vulnerability he'd displayed while working through his grief over Arya. And if I don't want to leave? The words came out before I could stop them. Something dangerous flickered in his expression. Then you need to understand what staying means. It means being associated with me, with my family, with everything we represent. It means accepting a level of protection that will sometimes feel suffocating. It means living with the knowledge that people like the Volkovs will always see you as potential leverage. It also means finishing Arya's diary, I said. Finding Lorenzo. Getting answers. Yes. I thought about my life before Gabriel. The endless cycle of working and worrying about money. The crushing loneliness of having no one who really saw me. Then I thought about the past week. The purpose I'd felt helping him understand his sister. The strange intimacy of shared grief. I'll stay, I said. At least until we finish what we started. But I have conditions. Name them. I go back to my apartment tonight. With security if necessary. But I need my own space. I held up a hand when he started to protest. I'm not Arya, Gabriel. I won't live in a gilded cage, even a temporary one. If I'm going to do this, I do it on my terms. He studied me for a long moment, and I could see the war playing out behind his eyes, the instinct to protect warring with the lesson he'd learned from losing his sister. Agreed, he said finally, but you keep your phone on you at all times, and you check in twice a day. If I call, you answer immediately. Deal. We shook on it, his hand warm and slightly rough against mine. When he didn't immediately release my grip, I looked up to find him watching me with an intensity that made my pulse quicken. You're not what I expected, he said quietly. What did you expect? Someone more frightened, more willing to simply do as she was told. His thumb traced a small circle against my palm. Instead, you challenge me. Push back. Remind me that control isn't the same as care. Is that a problem? No. He released my hand slowly. It's actually exactly what I need. We spent the rest of the day working through the final entries in Arya's diary. Her last words, written 2 days before her death, were simple and heartbreaking. Elle asked me again if I was certain. If I truly wanted to leave everything behind, including Gabriel. I told him yes. I told him I loved my brother, but I loved my freedom more. He understood. He always understands. 3 more days, and I'll be free. 3 more days, and I can finally breathe. She'd never gotten those 3 days. By evening, Gabriel had arranged for me to meet Lorenzo Bianchi the following day. The art professor had been reluctant at first, apparently traumatized by Aria's death and his own guilt over not preventing it. But Gabriel could be very persuasive when he wanted information. Vincent drove me back to Alston as darkness fell. Gabriel had assigned a second security detail, a younger man named Marco, who would maintain watch on my building. I tried not to think about how quickly I'd adapted to having armed guards monitoring my movements. In my apartment, I stood at the window and looked down at the street. Sure sufficient, I could see Marco's car parked across the road, a subtle but constant reminder that my life had fundamentally changed. My phone buzzed with a text from Gabriel. "Sleep well. Tomorrow we get answers." I replied with a simple, "Okay," and climbed into bed. Aria's necklace on my nightstand catching the streetlight. The woman who'd worn it had died trying to escape the very world I'd just agreed to enter more deeply. I should have been terrified. Instead, I found myself thinking about Gabriel's hand on mine, about the way he'd looked at me when he said I challenged him, about how grief and attraction had somehow tangled themselves together into something I couldn't quite name. Sleep came eventually, and with it, dreams of dead women and dangerous men and choices that couldn't be unmade. 3 weeks passed like I was living someone else's life. I returned to work at Marino's, where Marco treated me with a deference that bordered on unsettling. Gabriel had me over for dinner twice a week, always with business kept carefully separate from our time together. We talked about books, about the city, about mundane things that felt precious because they were normal. But normal was becoming harder to maintain. On a Wednesday evening, I'd just finished translating the last pages of Aria's diary when Gabriel announced he'd finally gotten Lorenzo to agree to meet us. The funeral director had been reluctant, carrying his own guilt about Aria's death, but Gabriel could be persuasive when he needed information. We met Lorenzo at a small Portuguese cafe in Cambridge on a gray Saturday afternoon. He was younger than I'd expected, probably early 30s, with kind eyes and paint permanently embedded beneath his fingernails. When he saw us approach his corner table, recognition and pain crossed his face simultaneously. "Mr. Caruso," he said, standing. His handshake with Gabriel was brief, tense. "This is Hannah Foster," Gabriel said. "She's been helping me understand Aria's final months." Lorenzo's gaze shifted to me, and I saw the weight of grief in his expression. "You read her diary." "I translated it," I said softly. "Your name was in almost every entry toward the end." We sat, ordered coffee none of us would drink, and fell into uncomfortable silence. Gabriel broke it first. "I need to know what happened," he said, voice steady but strained. "The night she died. Why she was on that road when she should have been at family dinner." Lorenzo's hands shook slightly as he reached for his cup. "She called me around 6. Said your father had found out about us, about her plans to leave. She was terrified, Gabriel. She said she had to run immediately, couldn't wait for the timeline we'd discussed." Gabriel's jaw tightened. "What timeline?" "We'd planned for her to disappear in 2 weeks. I had connections to an artist colony in Vermont, off-grid, safe. She was going to fake a trip to visit a friend in New York, then just not come back." Lorenzo's voice cracked. "But that night, she said there wasn't time. She said she had to leave right then. And you let her go alone?" The accusation in Gabriel's tone was sharp. "I begged her to wait for me. I was in the middle of teaching an evening class at the MFA. I said, give me 2 hours and I'd come get her. We'd leave together." Tears tracked down Lorenzo's face now, unchecked. "But she was too scared. She said your father knew everything, that he'd sent people to watch her apartment. She had to move while she still could." I reached across the table instinctively, covering Lorenzo's hand with mine. He looked at me gratefully, then back at Gabriel. "The last thing she said to me was that she loved me. That if anything happened, I should tell you she was sorry for leaving without saying goodbye." His voice broke completely. "And then 3 hours later, the police called to say she'd crashed her car." Gabriel stood abruptly, walking to the window. His shoulders were rigid, hands clenched at his sides. I could see him struggling to maintain control, to not lash out at the man who'd been the last person to speak with Aria before she died. "Did she tell you where she was going?" Gabriel asked without turning around. "North. She mentioned a friend with a cabin in New Hampshire. Someone from art school. She said she'd lay low there for a few days, then make her way to Vermont once things cooled down. She never made it." "No." Lorenzo wiped his eyes. I've spent 4 years wondering if I'd just left my class immediately, if I'd insisted on going with her, whether she'd still be alive. Gabriel finally turned back to us. It wouldn't have mattered. My father had already made his decision. If you'd been with her, you'd both be dead. The brutal honesty of the statement hung in the air. Lorenzo looked like he might be sick. I confronted him, Gabriel continued, returning to the table. 3 months ago, when I finally had proof about the brake lines, he said Arya was weak, that she would have destroyed everything our family built. He had no regrets. What did you do to him? Lorenzo asked, and there was fear in his voice now. I removed him from power, sent him away where he can't hurt anyone else. Gabriel's eyes were cold, flat. It's not sufficient justice for what he took from both of us, but it's what I could do without becoming exactly like him. We sat in heavy silence for several minutes. I thought about Arya's words in her diary, about her desperate need for freedom, about how love could become a cage regardless of good intentions. She talked about you, I said to Lorenzo, in her writing, about how you saw her as an artist, not just as a Caruso, how you made her feel like herself for the first time. He gave me a sad, broken smile. She was extraordinary. Her work was brilliant, original. She deserved to have the world see what she could create. I'd like to see it, Gabriel said quietly. Her paintings, if you still have any. I kept everything. Her canvases, her sketches, even the napkins she'd doodle on when we went to dinner. Lorenzo pulled out his phone, scrolling through images. I couldn't let go of her, even after she was gone. He showed us photo after photo of Arya's art, abstract pieces full of color and movement, portraits that captured raw emotion, landscapes that felt alive. I glanced at Gabriel and saw tears running silently down his face as he looked at his sister's work, seeing her talent fully for the first time. Could we meet again? Gabriel asked when we'd gone through all the photos. Perhaps you could show me her actual paintings. I'd like to understand that part of her better. Lorenzo nodded. I'd like that. She loved you, you know. Even when she felt trapped by your protection, she never doubted that you loved her. After Lorenzo left, Gabriel and I sat in the cafe for another hour, both processing what we'd learned. The waitress refilled our coffee 3 times, probably hoping we'd eventually leave, but Gabriel tipped her well sufficient that she stopped hovering. I killed her, he said finally. Your father killed her. I pushed her to the point where she felt running was her only option. If I'd been different, if I'd listened to what she needed instead of imposing what I thought was best, she wouldn't have been on that road. I chose my words carefully. You can't undo the past, Gabriel, but you can honor her memory by being different going forward, by not making the same mistakes with other people you care about. His eyes found mine, and something unspoken passed between us. We both knew he was trying to do exactly that with me, trying to protect without imprisoning, to care without controlling. Come on, he said, standing and offering his hand. Let's get out of here. We walked through Cambridge in the fading afternoon light, neither of us speaking, just existing in shared grief and understanding. Eventually, we ended up at the Charles River, watching rowers practice on the water. Thank you, Gabriel said, for everything, for translating her words, for coming with me today, for not judging what my family is. I'm not exactly in a position to judge anyone, I replied. I accepted $3,000 to involve myself in your world. That makes me complicit, or it makes you pragmatic. He turned to face me fully. Hannah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Okay, are you afraid of me? Of what I am? What I'm capable of? I thought about it seriously, examining my feelings with as much objectivity as I could manage. Sometimes, I admitted, when I see the cold side of you, the part that could exile your own father without hesitation. But mostly no. I'm not afraid of you, Gabriel. I'm afraid of your world, of the people in it who see me as a weakness to exploit. But you yourself, you've never given me reason to fear you. I want to keep it that way. He stepped closer, and my breath caught at the intensity in his gaze. I'm falling for you, Hannah. I have been since you first challenged me about taking my sister's necklace, and I need you to know that before this goes any further. My heart hammered against my ribs. Gabriel, you don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know where I stand. That this isn't just gratitude for helping me understand Arya. That you've become important to me in ways that have nothing to do with my sister or her diary. He was giving me space to respond, to accept or reject what he'd just offered. I thought about the past weeks, about how comfortable I'd become in his apartment, about how his protection had never once felt like control, about how I'd started looking forward to our dinners, to the way his guard came down when we were alone. I'm not ready to put a name to what I feel, I said honestly, but I think about you when we're apart. I feel safer with you than I ever have with anyone. And that terrifies me because I swore I'd never let anyone have that kind of power over me again. Again? I'd never told him about my mother's illness, about how watching her die had left me determined never to be vulnerable, never to need anyone. But standing there by the river, with Gabriel looking at me like I mattered more than territory, or power, or family legacy, the words came. When I finished, he pulled me into his arms, holding me while I cried for the first time in years about losing her. His embrace was warm, solid, and somehow both comforting and awakening at the same time. I won't let anyone hurt you, he murmured against my hair. Not the Volkovs, not anyone from my world. You have my word. I pulled back slightly to look up at him. That's exactly what Arya was running from. People who loved her but couldn't let her be free. I know. He touched my face gently, his thumb brushing away tears. Which is why I'm telling you right now. If you want to walk away from this, from me, you can. I'll make sure you're safe, and I'll let you go. It was the offer itself that made me certain of my answer. Because he meant it. Because unlike my ex or his father, or anyone else who'd claimed to love the people around them, Gabriel understood that love without choice wasn't love at all. I'm not walking away, I said. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I need you to promise me something. Anything. If I ever tell you I need space, you give it to me. No arguments, no convincing me otherwise. My autonomy isn't negotiable, Gabriel. It's the price of having me in your life. Agreed. He said it without hesitation, and I believed him. We stayed by the river until darkness fell, talking about everything and nothing, building the foundation of whatever we were becoming. And when Vincent finally drove me home, Gabriel's kiss goodbye was gentle, tentative, full of promise and restraint. In my apartment, I sat with Arya's necklace in my hands, thinking about the woman who'd worn it, who'd died trying to claim her freedom. I'd promised myself I wouldn't become her, wouldn't let love trap me into a life I didn't choose. But maybe, just maybe, it was possible to love someone without losing yourself. Maybe Gabriel really was different, learning from his sister's death rather than repeating the patterns that had killed her. I'd know soon sufficient whether that hope was justified or just another beautiful lie I was telling myself. A month slid past in a strange new rhythm. I worked my shifts at Marino's, where Marco had promoted me to assistant manager with a raise that felt both earned and suspiciously timed with Gabriel's increased involvement. 3 nights a week, I had dinner with Gabriel at his apartment, cooking together in his pristine kitchen or ordering takeout and eating on the balcony, while harbor lights sparkled below. We didn't talk much about his business, but I could see changes happening. Vincent mentioned casually that Gabriel had shut down 2 operations in Southie, ones that dealt in substances Arya had written about despising. Phone calls that used to happen in rapid Italian now sometimes occurred in my presence, Gabriel making no effort to hide discussions about real estate acquisitions and restaurant expansions, legitimate ventures that seemed to be slowly replacing the darker aspects of his empire. On a crisp December evening, Gabriel picked me up from work personally rather than sending Vincent. This alone signaled something significant. "Where are we going?" I asked as he drove us through the city. "Lorenzo's studio in the South End. He's finally ready to show me Arya's paintings in person." Gabriel's hands were tight on the steering wheel. "I want you there, for support." The studio occupied the 2nd floor of a converted warehouse, all exposed brick and industrial lighting. Lorenzo greeted us at the door, looking nervous but determined. The space was crowded with canvases, some finished, others works in progress, but one entire wall was dedicated to Arya's pieces. I watched Gabriel's face as he took them in. He moved slowly from painting to painting, spending long minutes in front of each one. Some were abstract explosions of color that seemed to capture pure emotion. Others were more representational, Boston landmarks rendered in ways that made familiar places look alien and beautiful. But it was the self-portraits that held him longest. Aria had painted herself repeatedly in those final months, each version revealing something different. In some, she looked trapped, her face distorted behind what might have been glass or water. In others, she was radiant, free, surrounded by light. "This one," Gabriel said, stopping before a large canvas. "This was her last, wasn't it?" Lorenzo nodded. "She finished it 3 days before she died. She called it Breaking Surface." The painting showed a figure emerging from dark water into brilliant sunshine, arms reaching upward, face tilted toward light. The figure was unmistakably Aria, and the joy captured in that reaching motion was almost unbearable to witness. "She was so close," Gabriel said, his voice rough. "So close to getting out. She was free in the only way that mattered." Lorenzo said quietly. "She'd made her choice. She'd taken action. Even if she didn't survive the attempt, she died pursuing her freedom rather than accepting her cage. That meant everything to her." Gabriel turned away from the painting, and I saw tears on his face for the second time since I'd known him. Lorenzo stepped forward, and the two men embraced, bound together by their shared loss and love for a woman who'd refused to be owned. "I want to buy them," Gabriel said when they separated. "All of her pieces. I'll pay whatever price you set." "I don't want your money," Lorenzo gestured around the studio, "but I do want her work to be seen. She deserved recognition while she lived. The least we can do is give it to her now." "A gallery," I said, the idea forming as I spoke. "What if you opened a gallery in her name, dedicated to emerging artists, people like Aria who have talent but need support and visibility?" Both men looked at me, and I felt suddenly self-conscious. "Hannah's right," Gabriel said slowly. "Aria would have loved that, using her legacy to help others avoid the isolation she felt." Lorenzo's face transformed. "I could run it. I have contacts in the art world, no young artists struggling for opportunities. We could host shows, provide studio space, maybe even offer grants. I'll fund it," Gabriel said immediately. "Whatever you need. Space, operating costs, the grants. Consider it done. With one condition," Lorenzo added. "We include some of your legitimate business ventures as sponsors. If you're serious about reforming what your family does, this could be part of that transformation. From criminal enterprise to cultural patronage." Gabriel smiled, a real one that reached his eyes. "Aria would appreciate the irony, using Caruso money to create beauty instead of pain." We spent the next 2 hours planning, Lorenzo sketching out ideas, while Gabriel made phone calls to his property managers about available spaces in the South End. I watched them work together, two men who'd both loved Aria, finding purpose in honoring her memory. When we finally left, full dark had settled over the city. Gabriel drove us back toward the seaport, but took an unexpected turn. "There's something I want to show you," he said. We ended up at a largely abandoned pier in Charlestown, old warehouses looming against the night sky. Gabriel led me to the water's edge, where wooden pilings jutted from the harbor like broken teeth. "Aria used to come here to paint," he explained. "Lorenzo told me about it. She loved how the light hit the water at sunset, how the decay around her contrasted with the beauty of the view. I could see it, could imagine Aria setting up an easel here, capturing the industrial ruins and natural grace in equal measure. The water lapped against the pier, and city lights reflected in the dark surface. "The Volkov situation is resolved," Gabriel said abruptly. "The mediation worked. They've agreed to stay out of my territories, and I've ceded some holdings in East Boston that weren't critical to my operations. You're no longer a target, Hannah. You're safe." Relief washed through me, but it was complicated by the realization that my excuse for staying close to Gabriel had just evaporated. We'd finished translating Aria's diary. We'd met Lorenzo. We'd planned the gallery. The practical reasons for our continued association had ended. "What does that mean for us?" I asked. "That depends on what you want." He turned to face me fully, his expression open in a way I'd rarely seen. "I meant what I said by the Charles River. I'm in love with you, Hannah. Not because you helped me understand my sister, though I'm grateful for that. But because you challenge me to be better. Because you see the worst parts of me and don't run. Because when I'm with you, I feel like I'm becoming the person Arya wished I could be. My heart hammered so hard I could feel my pulse in my throat. Gabriel, I'm not asking you to say you love me back. I'm not asking for promises or commitments beyond what you're ready to give. He took my hands in his. I'm just asking if you want to keep doing this. Keep seeing each other. Keep building something together. Without the excuse of Arya's diary or Russian threats or any other external reason. Just because you want to. I thought about the past months, about how my life had transformed from lonely survival to something richer, more complicated. About how Gabriel made me feel seen and valued in ways no one ever had. About how he'd proven repeatedly that he could protect without imprisoning, care without controlling. I want to, I said, squeezing his hands. I'm not ready to say I love you yet. I need more time to know if what I feel is real, or just gratitude wrapped in attraction. But I want to find out. I want to keep seeing where this goes. That's more than enough, he said, pulling me close. We'll take it slow. No pressure, no expectations beyond honesty. He kissed me then, gentle at first and then deeper. 4 years of his grief and my loneliness pouring into the connection. When we finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, the city stretched around us, full of possibility. There's one more thing, Gabriel said, reaching into his jacket. He withdrew a small box, and my stomach flipped. Before you panic, it's not a ring. He opened the box to reveal a delicate gold chain with a lily pendant, similar to Arya's necklace but clearly new. Clearly mine. I had it made, he explained, so you'd have something that's yours, not hers. But that still connects you to her memory, to what she represented. I let him fasten it around my neck, the weight settling against my collarbone. It's beautiful. Thank you. She would have liked you, Gabriel said, his voice thick with emotion. Arya would have appreciated how you refused to be intimidated by me, how you demanded autonomy as the price of relationship. She would have been glad I finally learned the lessons she tried to teach me. We stood at that broken pier for another hour, talking about the gallery, about our lives, about small mundane things that felt precious because they were ours. And when we finally returned to his car, I felt the shift between us. The transition from complicated grief and protection to something simpler and somehow more profound. 2 people who'd found each other through tragedy, learning to build something new from the broken pieces left behind. The drive back to my apartment took us through the city I'd called home for years, but was only now starting to really see. Gabriel's hand found mine across the center console, and I didn't pull away. Marco mentioned you might be interested in managing Marinos, he said casually. If you want it, the position is yours. Better pay, real benefits, normal hours. For a second, I could see myself back behind Marino's bar on that first awful night, hands shaking as I tried not to drop a tray. The distance between that girl and the one standing here made my chest ache. A quiet, stunned kind of gratitude threading through the fear that had once been my whole world. Did you buy the whole restaurant just to give me a promotion? I bought it because it's good business. The promotion is because you've earned it. He glanced at me. But if you'd rather do something else, we can explore that too. Lorenzo mentioned he could use help managing the gallery once it opens. I'll think about it, I said, touched by his efforts to create opportunities without making me feel obligated. Both options sound better than my current situation. Outside my building, Gabriel walked me to the door like we were teenagers on a first date, rather than 2 people who'd already spent countless hours together, navigating trauma and attraction in equal measure. Dinner Thursday? He asked. I'll cook. That pasta dish you mentioned liking. I'd like that. He kissed me again, softer this time. A promise rather than a question. I watched him return to his car and drive away, one hand touching the new necklace at my throat. Inside my apartment, I sat with both necklaces, Arya's original silver and my new gold, thinking about legacies and second chances and the ways love could either trap or liberate, depending on how it was given. Gabriel Caruso wasn't perfect. His world was still dangerous, his past still violent, his future still uncertain. But he was trying to be different, to honor his sister's memory by becoming someone she would have been proud of. and I was choosing to see where that journey led. One careful step at a time, with eyes fully open to both the risks and possibilities. 3 months later, spring arrived in Boston with that particular quality of light that made everything look possible. I stood in what would soon be the Aria Caruso Gallery, watching construction workers put finishing touches on the space Lorenzo and Gabriel had transformed from a former textile warehouse into something beautiful. The gallery occupied a corner building in the Sowa district, all exposed brick and skylights that flooded the rooms with natural illumination. Aria's paintings would be displayed in the main exhibition hall, a permanent collection that visitors could view free of charge. The rest of the space would rotate shows featuring emerging artists, exactly the kind of support Aria herself had needed and never received. "What do you think?" Gabriel appeared beside me, paint dust on his expensive shirt from helping hang frames. Over the past months, I'd watched him become more comfortable with manual labor, with being present rather than delegating everything. "I think she would love it," I said honestly. "Every part of it feels like her." Lorenzo emerged from the back office, carrying a clipboard and looking frazzled in the best way possible. He'd thrown himself into the gallery project with single-minded focus, channeling his grief into something productive. 3 weeks ago, Gabriel had officially made him director, with full creative control over exhibitions and programming. "We're still on schedule for the opening next weekend," Lorenzo announced. Invitations went out to every major art publication in New England, plus local news outlets. "We should have good attendance." "Better than good," Gabriel corrected. Vincent confirmed that the mayor will attend, along with several city councilors and prominent collectors. This is going to put Aria's work on the map. I watched the two of them discuss logistics, marveling at how far we'd all come from that rainy November night when Gabriel had first grabbed my necklace and demanded answers. Back then, I'd been terrified of him, desperate for the money he offered, unaware that accepting his proposal would completely reshape my life. Now I managed merinos as Gabriel had offered, a position that paid well and gave me stability I'd never had before. But more than that, I'd found purpose in helping establish the gallery, using my organizational skills and Italian language abilities to coordinate with international artists and handle communications. Gabriel and I had settled into a rhythm that worked for both of us. I kept my apartment in Alston, maintaining independence that mattered to me. He respected my boundaries without complaint, never pushing for more than I was ready to give. We had dinner together 4 or 5 nights a week, sometimes at his place, sometimes at restaurants, occasionally at mine when I wanted to cook. We'd become partners in the truest sense, building something together without the urgency and fear that had characterized our early interactions. "Hannah, can you look at this invitation list?" Lorenzo called, beckoning me over. "I want to make sure we didn't miss anyone important." I spent the next hour going through names, making suggestions, occasionally adding people Gabriel or Lorenzo had overlooked. It felt good to be useful, to be part of something meaningful rather than just surviving paycheck to paycheck. By late afternoon, the construction crew had finished for the day, leaving us alone in the nearly complete space. Gabriel ordered Thai food, and the 3 of us sat on the gallery floor, eating pad Thai straight from containers and talking about the opening. "I want to say something," Lorenzo said, setting down his food. "When Aria died, I thought I'd lost everything that mattered. The woman I loved, my future, my reason for creating art. I blamed myself for not being there when she needed me, for not saving her somehow." He looked at Gabriel, then at me. "But this project, this gallery, it's given me back purpose. Not to replace her, nothing could do that, but to honor her memory in a way that helps other artists avoid the isolation she felt. Thank you both for making this possible." Gabriel's expression was unreadable in the dimming light. Aria would be furious with me for waiting until she was dead to do this. She told me repeatedly that our family could use its resources for good instead of destruction. I didn't listen while she was alive. "The least I can do is listen now." "She'd forgive you," I said softly. "She loved you too much not to." We sat in comfortable silence for a while. 3 people bound together by love for a woman who'd died trying to be free. But her death had sparked changes she could never have anticipated. Transformations in Gabriel that rippled outward into his business dealings, his relationships, his fundamental approach to power and control. The week before the gallery opening, Gabriel took me to Mount Auburn Cemetery. We'd visited several times over the past months, and each trip felt less raw, more like communion with memory, rather than fresh grief. I had something made, Gabriel said, leading me to Aria's grave. A new bench sat beside her headstone. Simple wood and iron with a brass plaque that read, Aria Maria Caruso. Free finally. Loved always. It's perfect, I whispered, running my fingers over the inscription. I wanted people to have a place to sit with her, to rest while remembering. He settled onto the bench, patting the space beside him, and I wanted to bring you here before the opening, to ask you something important. My heart rate kicked up, but Gabriel must have seen the panic in my eyes because he quickly added, Not that. I'm not proposing, Hannah. I know you're not ready for that level of commitment, and I respect it. Then what? I want you to speak at the gallery opening, to tell the story of how you found Aria's necklace, how it led to translating her diary, to understanding who she really was. You knew her through her words in a way I never could while she lived. I think people should hear that perspective. The request surprised me. Gabriel, I'm not a public speaker. I'll embarrass you. You could never embarrass me. He took my hand. But if you're not comfortable, I'll understand. I just thought Aria would appreciate having another woman's voice tell her story, someone who understood her desire for freedom and autonomy. I thought about it for a long moment, watching sunlight filter through the trees around us. Okay, I'll do it. But you have to help me write it. I want to get the words right. We'll write it together. That evening, sitting at his dining table with Aria's diary open between us, we crafted a speech that honored her memory, without sanitizing the truth of why she'd died. We talked about families that loved but couldn't let go, about the difference between protection and control, about the cost of freedom and the price of safety. When you speak, Gabriel said as we finished the final draft, I want you to wear Aria's necklace, the original silver one you bought at the thrift shop. Are you sure? What about the gold one you gave me? The gold one is yours, representing who you are to me. But the silver one was hers, and it brought us together. It should be at the opening, part of her story. I agreed, touched by the symbolism. The gallery opening arrived on a perfect May evening, warm air carrying the scent of spring flowers from nearby parks. The space looked incredible. Aria's paintings lit dramatically against white walls, champagne flowing, people everywhere admiring her work. I stood near the entrance wearing a simple black dress, Aria's silver necklace at my throat, watching Gabriel move through the crowd. He'd invited his business associates, the legitimate ones at least, along with art world figures and city officials. It was a statement about the new direction he was taking, using Caruso influence for cultural benefit rather than criminal enterprise. Lorenzo gave the first speech, talking about Aria as an artist in person, about her talent and vision. Then it was my turn. I stepped to the microphone, looking out at dozens of faces. Gabriel stood in the back, Vincent beside him, both watching with encouraging expressions. 6 months ago, I began, my voice steadier than I felt. I bought a necklace at a thrift shop for $15. It was pretty and unusual, and I had no idea it once belonged to Aria Caruso. I wore it to work one night, and a man I'd never met before saw it and demanded to know where I'd gotten it. I told the story of that night at Marino's, of Gabriel's grief and desperation, of agreeing to translate Aria's diary. I talked about discovering a young woman who loved art and craved freedom, who felt trapped by family expectations and protective love that had become suffocating. Aria died trying to escape a cage built by people who loved her, I said, meeting Gabriel's eyes across the room. But her death became a catalyst for change. The man who grabbed my necklace that night learned from his sister's tragedy. He learned that loving someone means giving them space to be themselves, even when it scares you. He learned that protection without autonomy is just another form of control. I gestured to the paintings around us. This gallery exists because Gabriel Caruso chose to honor his sister by becoming the person she wished he could be, by using family resources to support artists rather than silence them, by making space for voices that need to be heard, just like Aria's voice needed to be heard. When I finished, There was a moment of silence before applause filled the space. I stepped away from the microphone, slightly dizzy with relief that it was over. Gabriel found me minutes later in a quiet corner, pulling me into an embrace. "That was perfect," he murmured against my hair. "Thank you for doing that." She deserved to have her story told properly. We stood together, watching people move through the gallery, admiring Aria's work, discussing the pieces in the way she'd always dreamed people would. Her art was finally being seen, finally receiving the recognition she'd deserved while alive. Lorenzo approached with a middle-aged woman who taught at the Museum of Fine Arts. "Hannah, Mr. Caruso, this is Professor Morales. She wants to discuss including Aria's work in an upcoming exhibition on overlooked Boston artists." The evening became a blur of conversations, introductions, champagne toasts. By the time the last guest departed near midnight, I was exhausted but happy in a way I couldn't remember being before. Gabriel, Lorenzo, and I stood in the empty gallery, surrounded by Aria's paintings. "We did it," Lorenzo said softly. "We gave her the recognition she deserved." "She did it," Gabriel corrected, gesturing to the canvases. "We just made sure people finally had the chance to see." Later, as Gabriel drove me home through quiet city streets, I thought about the strange journey that had brought us here, about how tragedy and loss could transform into something beautiful if we let it, about how the necklace I'd bought for $15 had changed everything. "I love you," Gabriel said suddenly, eyes on the road. "I know you're not ready to say it back, and that's okay. I just wanted you to know. Tonight, watching you speak about Aria, seeing everything we've built together, I've never been more certain of anything." My breath caught. He was right that I hadn't been ready to say those words before, but somewhere in the past months, while working on the gallery and navigating our carefully balanced relationship, my feelings had deepened into something I could finally name. "I love you too," I said, and watched shock register on his face. "I think I have for a while." I was just scared to admit it. He pulled the car over, ignoring the honking from behind us, and kissed me with an intensity that spoke of months of patient waiting finally rewarded. "Say it again," he whispered against my lips. "I love you, Gabriel Caruso. I love you for learning from your mistakes, for honoring your sister's memory, for giving me space to become who I needed to be." We sat in the parked car for a long time, kissing and murmuring promises, building a future on the foundation of all we'd survived together. When he finally drove me home, walking me to my door like always, I invited him up for the first time, not because I felt obligated or pressured, but because I wanted to, because autonomy meant choosing connection as much as choosing solitude. Inside my small apartment, surrounded by my own things in my own space, I finally felt ready to let him all the way in, not just physically, but emotionally, trusting that he would protect without imprisoning, love without controlling. "Are you sure?" he asked, even though we'd crossed this threshold before at his place. "I'm sure," I said, taking his hand. "I'm choosing this. I'm choosing you." And in that choice, made freely without coercion or fear, I found the same freedom Aria had died seeking. Not freedom from connection, but freedom within it. The liberty to love without losing myself, to be protected without being possessed. Gabriel Caruso wasn't perfect. His past was still violent, his world still dangerous in ways I was learning to navigate. But he was trying every day to be better, to honor his sister's legacy by becoming someone worthy of the second chance her death had given him. And I was building a life I'd chosen, with work that mattered, and love that liberated, rather than confined. Aria's necklace hung on my dresser beside the gold one Gabriel had given me. 2 pieces of jewelry representing past and future, loss and hope, endings and beginnings. Her gallery would open its doors every day, her art finally seen by the world she'd wanted so badly to be part of. And maybe, somehow, that was justice for a woman who died too young, seeking freedom she never lived to claim.